Chemistry, alchemy, sorcery, slowly succumbing to your own mercury vapors. Who hasn't wished they could just solve all their problems by quaffing some odorous magic brew? Being a wizard in real life, I've been interested in making potions since I first mixed a potion of acid with a bottle of fruit juice in NetHack and immediately exploded. And with so many potion making games popping up this last year, I'd figured I'd check out what's been brewing. And much like the fabled search for the Philosopher's Stone, embark upon my own search for the ultimate potion making game. So put on your smock and goggles because it's time for our first game, Potion Craft Alchemy Simulator. The first thing you'll notice about Potion Craft is the art style straight out of the Bayou Tapestry. It's got this nice aged vellum aesthetic which is uncluttered and fits the game perfectly, seeing as this one's more laid back and not terribly complicated. The actual potion crafting is done via the map behind the cauldron. By throwing ingredients into the cauldron, you can chart a course along the map and then actually travel it by stirring. If you're on top of an effect, you can pump the bellows to add that effect to your potion. Each ingredient adds its own special path along the map, but only by crushing it with your mortar and pestle can you draw out the entire path before adding it to the cauldron. So it's a bit of a puzzle to pick the right ingredients and how much to crush it to reach the desired effects on the map. Once you've got your potion, you can sell it, and use the money to buy more ingredients to make even more potions. You get a few free herbs and mushrooms from your garden every day, but not nearly enough to keep up with demand. Customers will only ever ask for one potion each, and they'll pay the most if it's got a strength of 3, which just means you lined up the potion with the outline of the effect almost perfectly before brewing. You've got a lot of customers, infinitely many actually, and thankfully you can save your recipes as long as you've got the blank pages available. The entire game consists of only 5 screens: the shop, the garden, the cauldron, the bed, and the alchemy machine in your basement. The alchemy machine is where you can ultimately combine different potions to create special compounds, and it exists as the main motivation or goal to the game, with the Philosopher's Stone serving as the final milestone. That's the gist of it at least. Now, I'm not usually one for deep mechanical analysis because, as they say, to perform an autopsy, first you need a corpse, and that means killing off a bit of the magic to peer at the moving gears. Plus, it opens up the door to people who simply can't agree to disagree, but I'm prepared to make a few scientific sacrifices on my quest for the ultimate potion-making game. The most striking thing about this game is the sort of soft physics everything has. Dropping ingredients in the mortar, dragging the pestle around, and then tossing it all in the cauldron, there's a nice weight to it. Softer ingredients go squish when you crush them, and harder ingredients like crystals have this viscerally satisfying crunch. Despite interfacing through the mouse, it manages to lend some physical feedback to the whole process. The sound cues contribute a lot to that. The pestle clacking when it contacts something, the ingredients splashing into the cauldron, but I'd say the biggest contributor is definitely the dynamic control. Instead of instantly dropping things in with a button prompt or a single click, you need to drag them about. Shockingly, if you give the player control over something for longer and give them the appropriate feedback, they'll feel like they have more control. Now I did say soft physics because it's mostly an illusion. It's not like you can crush things outside the mortar, and you can't pile things on top of each other or even crush 2 things at once, so if you try to play outside the lines, you'll end up breaking the illusion a bit. Knowing nothing about the development of this game, I'd wager the fine-tuning to something that seems so simple took a significant portion of dev time. So, does that feeling last the whole game? No, not really. At some point you're going to wish the merchants would start selling pre-smashed herbs instead. The major problem is that all you can do is crush them, so it's very easy to get fatigued when it's a prerequisite to get pretty much anywhere. If there were other options to get around, like chopping them, extracting them into a tincture, bruising them, just anything else, the variety would probably keep it from feeling too repetitive. As it stands, all you've really got is crushing, and pouring in water, which moves your potion closer to the center. That being the case, the herbs and mushrooms do exactly one thing each, and with no multiplicative interactions between them. This herb goes this direction, that herb goes that direction. There's no way to combine them except one after another. The main gameplay challenge is trying to find roots around the bony patches scattered about the map in order to get to the different effects, but it's not so much how to get around them, but how best to get around them. The hazards are static, and time isn't an element, so it's really just choosing and crushing. Thankfully, you can filter ingredients based on directions because there's a lot of them, which leads me into my next point, the economy. Not the real one, the in-game one. I mentioned it earlier, but aside from the very occasional upgrades to the alchemy machine and blank pages, the only use for gold is to buy more ingredients. But unless you're intentionally sabotaging yourself by buying 100 poop shrooms at 5 times markup, it's impossible to not make your money back. So you end up with this endless money feedback loop that just keeps growing the more you try to get rid of it. Mechanically speaking, that means money serves only one purpose, and that's to be a time gate. And that gate comes down pretty fast, especially if you haggle, which involves this very simple timing minigame, and basically just gives you 10 to 50% more gold per sale, or 10 to 50% off every purchase depending on which difficulty you use. I failed the hardest difficulty like twice. Granted, I'm a god, but you would need to be debilitatingly maladroit to not get at least 30% off on every transaction. After a while, you'll just stop haggling altogether because it just isn't worth the time anymore. In games, apart from controlling the pace, the economy as a limiting factor is often how you incentivize players towards and reward optimal play, or get them to engage with certain gameplay elements they wouldn't have otherwise, but there's not too much to optimize here. Occasionally, you'll get customers that want more than just a strength 3 potion of a single effect, but accommodating them would mean ignoring your recipes and brewing something custom, and in the time it takes you to do that, you could have made 5 times as much gold by just ignoring them and serving more customers. The start of potion craft is the most engaging section because you're still uncovering much of the alchemy map and discovering new effects while needing to work with limited ingredients. But after an hour or two, any semblance of scarcity is completely out the window. You might be tempted to head down and start pouring potions into the alchemy machine, but it's much more efficient to make a handful of potion recipes and spam sales until you've gotten a mountain of ingredients first. The vendors will occasionally ask for a potion to help them expand their wares, and by building your shop's reputation, you'll increase the amount that they'll bring with them. Although you build reputation by just playing the game, so again, it's strictly a measure of how much time you spend rather than any conscious strategy. So with all the mechanics available from the start and scarcity quickly a non-issue, the main meat of this game needs to be navigating the potion map and progressing through the alchemy machine, which is exactly as it appears. It's not terrible, a bit simple, but it can be relaxing. Once you've filled up the alchemy machine with the requisite potions, it'll spit out an alchemical crystal, which you need to make salt as well as the next crystal, and so on and so forth until you get to Philosopher's Salt, which asks for 10 different potions with 5 different effects each from all over the map. Suddenly, it's not so relaxing anymore, and the only thing driving you at this point is probably your completionist instinct. That's not the end, however, because to complete the final chapter, you need to reach popularity level 15, which took me between 2 and 3 hours of doing absolutely nothing but dropping potions onto the scales. And the only skill it was testing at that point was my patience and how little of the dialogue I could read before figuring out which potion they wanted. Doing nothing but grinding reputation after exhausting every bit of unique dialogue started giving me one of those dead mall vibes. Then when you win, you get this, and nothing really changes. It almost feels like the game doesn't know what to do with itself after you win. Oh yeah, there's also this abortive morality meter that goes down if you sell potions to bad people, but all it changes is whether or not the people buying a fire potion wanted to clear some weeds from their garden or burn someone's house down. If potion craft wasn't as laid back in presentation and mechanics, I'd probably dislike it, but it does have this sort of zen to it. This might seem like an odd comparison, but it reminds me a lot of Vampire Survivors, and its many copycats. It occupies your brain just enough to keep the independent thoughts away. It's serviceable in that regard. That being said, personally, I'll always have a preference for depth. Conceptually simple, mechanically complex. That's what I like. If each ingredient, instead of having a predefined path, had some set of attributes like direction, angle, distance, or, I don't know, effervescence along the map, then they could interact with each other multiplicatively. If one ingredient sent it in the direction you wanted, but gave it too much of an angle, you could try to counteract it with an ingredient that has a lot of spin in the opposite direction. You could crush them to amplify their attributes, or chopping could remove certain attributes. Anything, really. Certain ingredients' effects could only activate at certain heats, or number of stirs, or whatever. That would give you some dynamic control as well. Yeah, it's easy being the ideas guy, but the point is, if you set up an admittedly more complex framework, at some point you'll start getting additional mechanical complexity essentially for free. I'm not asking for Noi to wand levels of complexity, but I would like something. This is also a bit unfair considering it's outside of the scope of what the game could reasonably offer without becoming something completely different, but it is relevant to the quest. And that's that the potions just don't feel all that magical. There's no rarity, no utility, just the same bottles with different labels that you foist upon the endless queue of customers. You can make it about baking cookies and replace all the effects with flavors without really changing anything. That's a bit harsh, and I do like the aesthetics, but I'm going to assert that for potions, tangible effects expressed through gameplay with varying strengths depending on potion quality would be invaluable for the ultimate potion-making game. Overall, I'd say Potion Craft is a great podcast game, but I think I've already talked too much, so let's move on to the second game I played. Potionomics. Get it? It's like potions and economics. Potionomics should be familiar to anyone who's played Recettear, because it is Recettear. It's not really trying to hide this fact, same debt plot device, same time system, and same shop mechanics, but it's been 15 years, so I'd say it's lied fallow long enough to become fertile ground. Also, it doesn't have that god-awful dungeon crawling mechanic, which is instantly a win in my book. Anyway, you're Sylvia, a potion witch fresh out of, I don't know, potion making school, when your uncle suddenly ruins everyone's day by no longer being alive. You're set to inherit his potion shop, but what they neglected to mention was that it's a ramshackle dump and you'll be inheriting his debt as well. Your only shot at paying off the debt is to win the local potion tournament. Also, there's a talking owl living there. Potionomics spends very little time lore dumping its setting, which is a good narrative decision, I think. There was an evil witch who lived on this island until she exploded and the magical fallout suffused everything, from the potions to the animals, with magic, which just so happens to be great for making potions. Appropriately, it's more in the background. It's not like it's your problem, you just make potions for a living, and you've got bigger things to worry about, like your crippling debt. The winnings from the tournament might cover your debt, but to actually win, you need potions first. And to make potions, you need money. But to make money, you need to sell potions, which takes time, and you only get so much of that until the tournament. So time and resource management are a big part of this game. Oh yeah, and the haggling is a card battler. I'll talk more about that later. To actually make potions, you've got to use your collection of ingredients. Each ingredient contains, magimins, and they come in 5 different flavors. A, B, C, D, and E. Bit dry, but it works. The total number of magimins determines the strength of the potion, and each recipe requires a certain ratio of magimins. If your ratio is completely off, you can't brew it at all, and if the ratio is perfect, you'll get an extra 2 or 3 stars of quality, meaning you can sell it for more. There's also some ingredients that add positive or negative traits, like if it tastes good or bad, which adds plus or minus 5% to the value for each trait. Cauldrons have a maximum number of ingredients and magimins they can hold, so if you want stronger potions, you'll need to upgrade. Potions take time to brew, which you're encouraged to spend doing something else, like selling potions or talking to the colorful cast of NPCs. This travel screen is how you get more ingredients, by either buying them from the emo shop, investing in adventuring parties at the Handsome Anime Man, or hiring an independent adventurer, but you need to provide them with your own potions. Unlike Reciteer, where you're forced to play the most boring dungeon crawler ever invented, in Potionomics they'll just run off and come back a couple hours later with the spoils. Like any smart businessman, or woman, your best bet is to diversify. So your goal is to balance all of these things while setting aside enough time to brew your competition potions before the end of 10 days, and then do it all over again. I'm going to be upfront and just say, I actually liked this one, so I'm not going to spoil too much, but I've still got a lot to say about it. Okay, first off, and there's no avoiding this, but the loading times. They're everywhere. Going from your shop to the cauldron, loading screen. Swapping equipment, loading screen. Going from one NPC to another, more loading screens. Granted, I'm a dinosaur who saves their Steam games on a hard disk, and an SSD probably would have improved things, but it's still worth mentioning. Also, the UI is straight up aggravating at times, especially towards the end when you've got like 10 pages of ingredients. Why does clicking the fuel filter out fuel? If I wanted only fuel, I need to filter out ingredients and potions instead. Fuel and potions shouldn't even be in the same window. Anyway, unlike potion craft, the economy here actually serves its purpose by incentivizing optimal play, as well as being a limiting factor that adds tension. If you have more gold, you can get your hands on better ingredients or better cauldrons, which in turn gets you more gold from the higher quality potions they can make. It's essentially exponential, so the sooner you get gold, the more you'll have later, which is actually important here because we're running on a time limit. That being said, what optimal play even isn't that straightforward. This broaches a rather broad discussion on behaviorism and how players learn through gameplay, which is probably outside the purview of this video, but how the player learns is important. When it comes to games, the most common method is probably operant conditioning, or in less pretentious terms, doing something and seeing what happens. In a platformer, if you jump too short and fall in a pit, maybe just don't jump so short next time. However, this method of learning is completely predicated on the cause having a tangible effect, and in something like Potionomics, the effect is quite divorced from any cause. The most observable effect in this case would be how well you perform at the competition, and what exactly you did in the 10 days that contributed to that is difficult to decipher. Was it selling a lot of potions? Was it upgrading your shop? Or was it focusing on adventuring and optimizing for the competition potions? It was all of it, conceivably, and in a resource management game where you're encouraged to optimize for time, you're often left scratching your head on what exactly that means, so you just kind of do something. Obviously, you don't want it to be so obvious that there's no element of deduction at all, and this is more idle vaporing than actual criticism, but this leads me to the difficulty. The only fail state is if you lose the competition, and you can fail. The game keeps an autosave at the start of every day, so if your potions are actually of the weakest, you can jump back to however long ago you think it'll take you to make better ones. But that is an incredibly punishing fail state that can mean hours retreading old content and reduces the game to its worst elements of navigating the menus and loading screens, as there's no longer any narrative progression. The solution, as ever, is to reduce the difficulty. The game is incredibly generous, and while you're expected to use the haggling mechanic to beat the competitions, it's fairly trivial to win instantly just because your potions are so good. This really reached its peak when by the end of the game I'd managed to brew the best potion physically possible and instantly beat the final boss. The sheer anticlimax was, well, to avoid spoilers, something happened only for me to still win instantly. It was exquisite. It's weird feeling punished for being too good at the game. This is an example of how having a single line of dialogue acknowledging my instantaneous victory could have changed my disappointment to undiluted smugness. To seal off all this rattling about the learning process, in Potionomics it's less about finding what works and more that everything works. I'm hesitant to say that with too much confidence, since skimming through the Steam reviews I know some people actually encountered the fail state I was talking about, but the first and second competitions are actually the hardest. It only gets easier as you go along thanks to the time value of money, so the difficulty curve is a bit backwards. A game like this is a bit of an example of the conflict between difficulty and accessibility, where to avoid losing the less skilled players, you end up boring the skilled players. As for the card battler, it pains me to say this, but I was never forced to engage with it much. Each card costs the customer's patience to play, and when a customer's patience reaches 0, they'll just leave. Ending the turn also costs patience, and that cost increments by 1 each turn. The point of haggling is to increase the price of the potion, but I feel like it has this irreconcilable conflict with the shop design. You can't give it too much depth because otherwise dealing with customers would take too long, and so you only ever last like 2 or 3 turns, and that leaves very little time for complex strategies. I've beaten Slay the Spire's heart at Ascension 20, so I'm at least familiar with card battlers, and I just didn't give this one much thought simply because I didn't need to. Maybe if there was continuity between the battles such that you retained your buffs and your place in the deck, but each customer is its own fight. There is some continuity where every 5% of stress adds a stress card to your deck, but it's not much. From the way I've been speaking, you might think I was lying when I said I actually liked this game, and that may have been the case if this was just about the mechanics. Potion brewing is a fun little brain teaser when you're trying to get the ratios just right, but everything else just feels a little wanting. However, there's more to games than just gameplay, and while I'll always prefer mechanically tight games, Potionomics' strength lies in its vibrant characters. Their designs are colorful, their animations are extremely expressive, and their writing actually made me go heh on multiple occasions, which is a pretty high standard for me. Accordingly, there's some visual novel elements in this game. You can talk to characters to relieve stress, and build your relationships with them in order to unlock more cards for your deck. I appreciate that talking to them actually has gameplay benefits. It's a good way to encourage actually doing it. And I just want to say, making a 4-armed character's animations look completely natural is a lot more impressive than you think it is, and I can only imagine the amount of effort that went into all the keyframes. Supposedly, the development of this game took about 6 years, and I can see why. Fitting with the visual novel elements, there's also romance, and I'm never sure how I'm supposed to feel about romance in games like this with a fully characterized and independent main character, especially when they're the opposite sex. Am I supposed to self-insert as something that's clearly not me, or am I meant to play the role of some voyeuristic ghost trying to get people to hook up so I can watch them through a window? Regardless, I ended up choosing the Moth Chick because she's got 4 arms, and I'm not going to elaborate on that any further. I regret not talking to the characters more during my playthrough, but I had tournaments to demolish. Compared to Potioncraft, I think it does a lot more potion-related things right, like the potions themselves possessing varying qualities with rather impressive graphics to indicate it, and actual utility as you can use them to power up your adventures to get even more ingredients, instead of just selling them. The shop mechanics are a lot deeper, but compared to Reciteer, where you had to pay off the debt with the same money you needed to run the shop, I think paying off the debt through the tournaments instead takes some narrative weight away from the shop itself. The gameplay is enough to elevate it above a mere visual novel, but the narrative and characters are definitely doing the heavy lifting for sure. There's no post-game content, and there's little reason to replay it once you've experienced the whole story, so with all that in mind, I'd definitely recommend it if you like a nice self-contained story with fun characters. Oh yeah, and the music's good too. For the ultimate potion-making game, I'd definitely argue that narrative is extremely important. If the world, game dynamics, and characters treat potions with some sort of narrative weight, the player will form an appropriate affective association with them. One example would be how, despite being nothing more than pixels on a screen, the BFG from Doom can fill the player with a very real feeling of power as enemies that you're accustomed to taking several shots are melted away instantly. This kind of immersive connection is, I think, also non-negotiable. With that in mind, let's move on to our third game, Potion Permit. Potion Permit is a top-down, free-roaming RPG where you play as a chemist from the Medical Association, serving as liaison for an island of people who don't like chemists very much, seeing as they killed off a ton of their native flora, preferring to stick with their hoodoo-voodoo witch doctor for medical treatment. The graphics are well-crafted, if a bit generic, and that's the long and short of it, so let's get down to brass tacks. I'm loath to say anything profoundly negative about something that someone spent real, genuine care and effort creating, but there is no getting around the fact that I disliked this game on a deep, fundamental level, both spiritual and physical. It hardly qualifies as a game. It is an eidolon of ennui. It is a lacuna of ludology. The interstice between good and bad so razor-thin it can only be commended for its absolute dedication to mediocrity. I know this sounds weird coming from the guy who actually liked Marrow and plays Factorio challenges for hundreds of hours, but torture me, irritate me, but please don't bore me. To be fair, if it weren't for the fact that I felt obligated to finish it for this video, I would have quit an hour in and been like, yeah, it's a bit boring, instead of letting it ferment into this ripe ball of disdain. But let's start off with the title, Potion Permit. Yeah, bureaucracy, that's exciting. And they mean it too. You're not allowed to brew certain potions until you pass an exam to get a better permit. You're not advancing science or struggling to secure your place in the world. You're just doing what someone told you. Anyway, PP starts out with this endless string of cutscenes that establishes everything I've already told you except over the course of an hour. Then you learn that the reason that the mayor has lifted his anathema on chemists is because his daughter is ill and their traditional medicine is helpless to cure it. Oh, you might think. There's the plot. I was looking for it. Our motivation is we need to research the cure for the daughter's mysterious illness which has driven the mayor to risk his citizens' stigma against chemists. But no, you just play the worst game of DDR ever created and instantly figure out what's wrong with her. This introduces you to PP's potion brewing mechanic. You drag colored squares onto a grid. Each ingredient has its own special shape, and the cauldron can only hold a certain number of ingredients, but this would have been an interesting challenge maybe if I was 4 years old. Then the cauldron goes ape like someone threw a brick into a washing machine. And finally you get your potion. Mercifully, once you've brewed the same potion 5 times, you can save the recipe and do it automatically from then on. Well, we take the potion to the girl, and she's like, wow, I feel better already! And then everyone starts filleting your genius, except for the witch doctor who still refuses to accept you. But don't worry, there's no actual tension there. And with that, you've experienced the absolute limit of PP's dramaturgy. There's no driving plot, merely a setting, no tension, and absolutely no impetus to do anything. Now, gameplay in of itself could be the impetus. If it's fun. I play Factorio for Christ's sake, which has all the plot of a great value sticker, but this is the gameplay. You run around cutting down trees, smashing rocks, and slapping plants that spawn in the exact same place in the exact same numbers every day. I've heard people compare this to Stardew Valley. And yeah, it's Stardew Valley if you took out the whole farming thing and left only the parts where you talk to one-dimensional NPCs and pick up random crap by the side of the road. There's combat, but it's hardly worth mentioning. It's so easy I never died, not even once. Instead, my main focus was luring monsters next to trees and rocks so I can maximize stamina by smacking both at the same time. The game also gives you a dog that follows you around everywhere to pander to the heckin' pupper crowd, I suppose, but I'm not so easily swayed. Even when it was begging for food, I never fed it, because I knew the game didn't have the balls to actually punish me for anything. And it didn't. If there was an element of searching or even luck to resource gathering, it might approach something resembling fun, but with zero stimulation or variance, it's pure busy work. That's not to say that there's no place for busy work in games, so long as it lends some kind of weight to later mechanics, as suddenly independent of any in-game value, it starts to represent something that has very real value: your time. Beyond that, there are some times you want to just decompress in games, and repetitive tasks can actually be beneficial, so long as it's feeding into some other game dynamic, and PP misses the mark there as well. PP is so decompressed anymore is at risk of giving you the bends. You spend all this time gathering ingredients to support the primary gameplay loop of what exactly? Making potions that have no utility outside of selling or curing patients, presumably. Every other day or so, one of the NPCs from the town will appear in the clinic with some random ailment. You've got 4 whole days to actually cure them, and even if you don't, there's hardly any repercussions to just ignoring them. Everyone's just like, wow, you suck. So you do your diagnosis dance. and then just brew the potion that the game tells you, and within the minute you'll be back to endlessly gathering the same things in the same forest. There is zero progression, and the same old man will come in complaining about the same joint pain on day 1 as day 100. There are the aforementioned permits, but they don't really let you do anything but brew different potions that have the exact same utility as the one you could already make, getting people the F out of your clinic. It's not like people will show up requiring treatments that you don't have the permit for either, so what's the point? Well, the point of getting higher permits is that you can also unlock 3 exciting new areas to also mindlessly gather things in. But the permit itself doesn't do that. No, you've got to go to the mayor first and get his permission. And once you have permission, you're given the privilege of fixing the way in, which always takes about 1,000 more sticks and stones than you've gathered up to that point, despite the fact that that's all you've been doing. If you go in these new areas, you'll find some glowing pit of weirdness, and the first time you see it, you might think that some semblance of a narrative is about to appear. But no, as usual, you solve it instantly and all you get out of it are a few new flowers to pick, which again only serve to feed into an abortive clinic mechanic that isn't even interesting in the first place. This can only lead me to believe that the main gameplay loop isn't the whole potions thing, it's talking to NPCs and running their fetch quest errands for them, and if that sounds like fun, then be my guest. The writing in this game is insipid. The Capitol, the Medical Association, it's like I'm reading some teenager's isekai novel. Going to this from Potionomics is like walking out of a steakhouse to go dumpster diving behind the Wendy's. My heart goes out to the writer. Writing this much dialogue isn't easy, but it fails right out of the gate because it hasn't even made me care about the game, much less the characters. It's a problem of the medium, I think. Stardew Valley's characters are also hopelessly one-dimensional. I'm not going to rail on this too hard, but walking up to a gyrating mass of pixels and getting out some fatuous dialogue as a friendship meter arbitrarily fills is not going to make me interested in them as a character. In fact, it does the opposite, because I can't help but see them for the computer code they are when it's just a matter of talking to them mechanically and reading the same line until inexorably we become friends. By the way, here's the other exciting minigames PP has to offer for some quick cash. Sorting things left or right, pressing a button really fast, and repeating a sequence of directions. These could have worked as games, but there's no dynamics at all. Either you just do them or you don't, and chances are you'll complete them in about a third of the time provided. If your performance affected how much money you got paid, suddenly it might actually be fun if I'm allowed to feel like skill's involved. But as it stands, the only motivation to perform well is that the faster you finish it, the sooner you can stop playing it. PP just isn't hard, or challenging at all, and I'm not saying it needs to be, but when you're bored out of your skull, you start wishing there was even one mechanic for you to chew on. The closest thing to interesting that happened was one day where 5 people were sick all at once, but still it's just a matter of completing several painfully easy minigames and giving them what the game tells you. If you had some potions you needed to diagnose someone and rule out possible illnesses without over-medicating them, then maybe it would be a little more interesting, but just going down the game's checklist isn't entertaining or engaging, and it certainly doesn't make me feel like I'm actually treating anyone. Funnily enough, if we were treating random patients instead of the game's NPCs, it would probably be a lot more compelling, because then they could, I don't know, actually die without breaking the entire game. Overall, PP is just totally flaccid in tone. Again, I've just got to reiterate how important a proper narrative would be here. It's not like every game needs one, but you need to have something. Everything has this vaguely European aesthetic, except they also believe in witch doctors, yet there's no cultural rationalization for that, no evidence of people being particularly superstitious, or even what the witch doctor actually does. There is a church, but rather than any narrative significance, it feels like it's only in the game to give the developers an excuse to add a demure nun character to put next to their constantly shishaying pirate lady. Everything just feels half-assed. Being a doctor is an incredibly powerful dramatic piece, but it feels totally mishandled here. Anyway, you clean up all the chemical spills by researching them, and the researching minigame itself beggars belief. It's not even a game, it's just cycling through 4 possibilities on every slot until the game tells you you're right. Once you've cleaned everything up, it turns out that the original chemists weren't bad at all, and they were actually trying to prevent all of these things from happening until they were unjustly blamed for them and kicked out before they could find the solution. Just in case you thought for a second that this game was anything more than anodyne. Listen, I understand cozy games, but maybe choose a different subject than illness if you're trying to be cozy. Your reward for all of that is this scene, and then the game keeps shambling on, because that isn't really the end or even all that important, it's just the closest thing PP has to a plot and resolution, so I'm gonna take it and run. After that, you can get your final permit, but why would I want to spend another minute treating Old Man Johnson's fractured ass? PP really reinforces my assertion from Potionomics, but it also makes me appreciate the importance of the ingredient gathering as well. There needs to be an actual search, an active process which could lead you into getting some of those reward chemicals everyone likes to talk about so much when you find something rare. Like a gacha game, except it's made out of grass and doesn't steal all your money. This leads me into Wytchwood. Okay, sort of. Only after playing it did I realize that it doesn't really qualify as a potion-making game at all, and I was lied to, but I liked it so I kept playing anyway. Plus it's got crafting, so it's at least obliquely relevant. Wytchwood is a brilliantly expressive pastiche of classic German fairy tales. Gameplay-wise, it's a lot like a classic adventure game where you need to combine things to progress, except instead of needing to find the one thing to rub on the other thing until it works, raw materials spawn infinitely and you craft all the items you need out of them. The game also tells you what you need at all times and where to find them, so the only room for intelligence is meta stuff like gathering a ton of a certain resource while you're in the area, assuming it'll save you time later. The story revolves around the titular witch, who has chicken feet and wears a cauldron on her head. I just wanted to say, with witches being co-opted by TikTok girls and black lipstick, it's refreshing to see a return to form. The story itself is very evocative of traditional beast fables, with each subplot revolving around one anthropomorphized animal representing their own mortal vice. I do mention Wytchwood because it gave me some insight into the resource gathering process, which again wouldn't be anywhere near enough to support this game without the excellent story paired with it. Similar to potion craft, it mostly serves to keep the pace so you can properly digest the story. Overall, it just reinforces my stance on resource gathering that I've already acquired from Potion Permit. Resource gathering and crafting is clearly a compelling game mechanic, considering every other game seems to have it now, but it's not intrinsically fun, and the onus is on the gameplay to justify it. It's not like you mine diamonds in Minecraft just because you like doing it, ostensibly you're more interested in what you're gonna do with the diamonds. Something like Wytchwood's crafting fails in that regard because all the items have the same utility, insofar as they all exist to unlock progression gates in equal measure, but if you want to see what's behind the gate, you'll be compelled to complete the crafting requirements. Wytchwood isn't setting the world on fire, but it's a nice little story which took me around 10 hours to complete, so it gets a thumbs up from me. Okay, last but probably least, Alchemy Garden. I figured I'd throw in some obscure indie project like this to help keep my perspective in check. In Alchemy Garden, you alchemy, and you garden. What more could you ask for? The general level of polish is as it appears, but it's a solo project so it gets some leniency. What matters is the gameplay, and more pointedly, the potion crafting. Well, you run around a rather limited environment and pick random flowers, then come home and throw 3 of them into a cauldron and maybe get a potion out of it. Each ingredient has one trait, like aromatic or stimulant, and each potion is a combination of 3 different traits. It's not terribly stimulating. Again, we've got resource gathering. The ingredients spawn randomly, but the map remains static. Slightly better than Potion Permit, but not by much, and it really makes me appreciate how much procedural generation can spice this process up. To get away from needing to find plants, you can grow them instead. Unfortunately, my garden hoe broke right as I finished the shaft. You can buy seeds at town, and trying to plant them really starts to waft up some of those good old indie jank fumes. Then you water them for a couple days, and presto, you've got more flowers to mash and turn into potions. Finally, you sell them to get money at your shop. Potionomics this is not, however. It's just standing around waiting for customers to mysteriously spawn in whenever you open the shop, despite never seeing any roaming outside. There's a lot of things you can buy, and lots of customization you can do for your shop, but similar to Potion Permit, I've already sussed out what the entire gameplay loop is at the start, and I found it lacking. So without any sort of driving narrative, I just didn't feel compelled to play it to completion. Also, this video is going to be long enough as is. So naturally, I started trying to break out of bounds, and my gamer intuition led me to the discovery of this technique, where if you keep hammering pause and jump while rubbing against a surface, you'll eventually get launched into the sky. As much as I'd like to take a look at all the obscure potion-making games in search of an interesting mechanical twist, I'm going to leave it at these 5. Which is a bit bittersweet, because while some still get my recommendation, it's difficult to say that they're THE potion-making game. However, when I was going over all my criticisms, I realized that there is a game that seems to contain everything I've been whining about. It's called Pathologic 2. In Pathologic, you control a shamanistic doctor who returns to his homeland as it's being ravaged by a mysterious plague. Right off the bat, there's an incredible dramatic weight to that setting, and it puts everything in context, making the potions, or more properly the tinctures and antibiotics, as simple, but many times more impactful than any of the other games I've talked about previously because how desperately you need them. Not only are they necessary to treat your patients, but they're also the only thing stopping you from getting infected yourself. Having a belt full of tinctures is the difference between walking confidently through an infected district or needing to take the long way around, wasting precious time. Eventually you start to associate that feeling of confidence and safety with the potions themselves. You seek them out because you know how empowering they are, but invariably you'll always feel it in your viscera when your stock starts running low. You make tinctures out of the herbs you find lying around, and when you've already been conditioned, hearing the telltale sounds of the herbs calling to you just fills you with excitement. There's also the time management aspect that makes the potions seem even more scarce and valuable, as every second you spend wandering the steppe is 1 second not spent treating people. Though you can only actively protect a handful of NPCs, you actually want to, because without you they'll simply just die. You need to use the tinctures to either boost immunity or discover what kind of treatment the patient needs and administer the appropriate antibiotic to reduce infection. Again, not terribly complicated, but because it uses the same tinctures that you rely on to protect yourself, you really feel how difficult it is to help others. You can make antibiotics by harvesting the organs from infected corpses, much to the ire of the natives, however. This sort of risk-reward time management aspect of the game suffuses meaning into everything, and suddenly simple actions like picking something up and combining it with a vial of water is something you look forward to doing, if only because it's a break from the intensity of the rest of the game. Even the vials of water you rely upon will soon become precious as clean water becomes harder and harder to find. That being said, Pathologic isn't exactly known for being fun. Some people jokingly call it a stress simulator rather than a game, and while I found it fun, I'm aware that my definition of fun is probably a little different from yours. It does, however, contain much of what I've been talking about, this marriage between narrative and gameplay that brings the potions into their own. This does bring up the conundrum of what makes a game a potion-making game. Despite making potions in Pathologic, you'd really struggle to call it a potion-making game. Might as well say the same of Morrowind or Oblivion. In order to make the potions seem valuable and desirable enough to warrant the efforts of their creation, the gameplay needs to encourage it in ways independent of the potion-making process itself. If the only end result of making potions is being able to make more potions, it fails. The game needs to maintain this closed loop of gathering, creating, and eventually using, in which each step reinforces one another. Yet it seems the more you try to justify the use of potions, the less about creating potions the game becomes. It's difficult to reconcile, but not impossible, I don't think. It's much like the Philosopher's Stone. The ultimate potion-making game is yet to be created. But unlike the Philosopher's Stone, it might actually exist in someone's brain right now. Sorry if that's a bit anticlimactic, but now that I've done the hard part, I'm just going to fold my arms and wait patiently for someone else to do the easy part and to make it. Hopefully you enjoyed this deep dive into a niche only I care about. More Factorios next. Okay, bye.